Hey friends, tonight's story drifts quietly into ancient Baghdad, a city of rain, riverboats, and palace mysteries. It's called The Tale of the Three Apples, and it's a story of curiosity, misunderstanding, and the delicate balance of human perception. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I share here. And if you're listening right now, drop a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing who's joining us from around the world. Now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself drift into tonight's story. You didn't just wander into a palace mystery. No, you're stepping into the quiet, peculiar rhythms of a city where even three ordinary apples can set off extraordinary events. It is a quiet evening in Baghdad, though not so quiet as to be peaceful. The year is tucked somewhere in the 9th century, when lamps burned oil instead of electricity and people judged time not by the ticking of clocks, but by the length of shadows or the stubborn memory of prayer calls. On this particular evening, the skies above the city are heavy with rain, the kind that makes merchants roll up their carpets early and drives stray cats beneath the awnings of tea shops. The streets glisten with muddy water, and the sound of droplets pattering on rooftops adds a soft percussion to the night. Within the palace, however, the storm is no match for a restless caliph. Harun al-Rashid, ruler of the Abbasid world and possessor of the sort of wealth most of us can only imagine when scrolling through fantasy novels, sits upon his cushions and feels vaguely dissatisfied. You may think a caliph surrounded by silks, musicians, servants, and gold would have little reason to feel bored, but history is a cruel companion. Even kings grow restless. Tonight, Harun is restless in precisely the way powerful men often are. By deciding that someone else must bring him amusement or else face consequences that range from dramatic scolding to much worse. And so, with the rain tapping away on the palace roof, Harun summons his vizier, Ja'far. Now, it must be said that Ja'far ibn Yahya was not a man unfamiliar with the caliph's moods. Being vizier to Harun al-Rashid was a position of both great privilege and constant risk. Like being given the honor of holding a lion's leash, while also standing in front of the lion's mouth. On good days, Ja'far could enjoy banquets, poetry, recitals, and the admiration of courtiers. On bad days, he was handed the impossible tasks of satisfying whims no one could have predicted. And tonight, as thunder mutters over the Tigris, Ja'far quickly realizes this is shaping into one of the latter evenings. Harun leans back, eyes glittering with the kind of irritation that comes not from hunger, not from fatigue, but from sheer ennui. He declares, in the calm yet terrifying way only a caliph can, that he wishes to be entertained. Something mysterious, something gripping, something more than the same poems about gazelles and wine that his court poets recite every week. He wants a story that will surprise him. More dangerously, he wants his vizier to supply it. You, dear listener, may feel sympathy for Ja'far at this moment. Being told to fetch a story is like being told to fetch thunder. It is not exactly a thing one keeps in storage. Outside, Baghdad hums with its ordinary nocturnal rhythm. Lanterns flicker along the market stalls that remain open despite the drizzle. Somewhere along the river, boatmen call to each other as they haul goods through the current. And somewhere in the city, though Ja'far does not yet know it, the strange tale of the three apples is beginning to drift quite literally toward the palace. For the time being, however, Ja'far stands with his head bowed, trying to think of what sort of mystery could possibly please a man who has already heard more tales than Shahrazada herself could spin in a lifetime. The situation is not promising. Scholars who study this period often remind us that Harun al-Rashid's court was as much about performance as governance. To be in his presence was to be part of a theater, with roles assigned not by script but by power. The caliph demanded spectacles because they reminded everyone that he could summon marvels with a word. If Harun wished for a story to appear out of the rain, then it was Ja'far's unenviable role to make the sky deliver one. Whether such requests were fair was not the point. The point was obedience. And so Ja'far, with the calm exterior of a man, internally calculating every possible way to avoid execution, assures his master that something unusual will indeed be found. The rain continues its soft drumming. Within the palace walls, lamps cast warm circles of light across mosaics that tell of earlier victories, battles, and banquets. The caliph stares into the shadows, waiting. The vizier bows again, already rehearsing the many apologies he will need to invent should no satisfactory marvel present itself before dawn. And yet, far from the palace, fate has already begun to stir. Down the Tigris River, where the swollen waters carry more than just driftwood, a wooden chest has been loosened from the banks and is floating silently toward Baghdad. It is not large enough to hold treasure, not ornate enough to pass for a gift. But its journey will soon pull Ja'far into one of the strangest and most unsettling mysteries of the Arabian Nights. There is, as historians like to point out, no real proof that Harun al-Rashid ever demanded stories in this dramatic fashion. Much of what we know of him is filtered through legend, where rulers are less men and more symbols of grandeur. Yet legends have a way of outlasting reality, and so we picture him here in his palace, listening to the rain and insisting on a tale, because This is how the storytellers wanted us to remember him. A caliph who could call upon wonders, not because he needed them, but because he could. The chest on the river is both real and metaphorical. Gift of narrative floated down by destiny to satisfy a ruler's boredom. As the hour lengthens, Ja'far excuses himself to prepare. His servants glance nervously, whispering among themselves about what task their master may now be forced into. For the vizier, there is little comfort in the luxury around him. The silks, the incense, the jewels all, these mean little if one's head is perpetually balanced on the edge of displeasure. And displeasure, as he well knows, is a storm far fiercer than the one rattling the palace windows tonight. Still, in the strange arithmetic of stories, restlessness breeds narrative, and narrative breeds consequence. It is only because Harun is restless this rainy evening that Ja'far's life is about to change, and with it the fate of several unlucky apples. So the night deepens. The caliph grows silent. The vizier grows uneasy, and the city outside slumbers beneath the wet, glistening rooftops. Somewhere on the river, the chest bobs closer, carrying with it not wealth, not comfort, but something that will ensure Ja'far's promise of a mystery is fulfilled, though not in the way he hopes. And you, drifting here with the tale, may already sense what Ja'far does not. That stories, once summoned, have a way of writing themselves, and they rarely grant their tellers a peaceful night's rest. Ja'far the Vizier stands near the edge of the marble hall, his hands folded neatly. Though the tension in his shoulders betrays the polite calm he tries to project, aware that on nights like this, a mere nod or faint smile will not suffice. For the caliph desires fascination, intrigue, the kind of story that twists the mind just enough to make him feel clever without lifting a finger. The air is thick with the scent of wet stone and faintly burnt lamp oil, and every echoing footstep reminds Ja'far that he is about to be tasked with something impossible, something that cannot be refused without the subtle threat of displeasure, which, in the caliph's vocabulary, is rarely a gentle word. The caliph leans forward, eyes sharp despite the rain's hypnotic lull outside, asking for a mystery, a puzzle, or some clever diversion in a tone that is more playful threat than casual question. And Ja'far feels the familiar shiver of a challenge that requires both speed and imagination, neither of which come easily after a long day surrounded by scrolls and endless decisions. One might argue, if one were feeling philosophical, that viziers exist to survive unreasonable demands, to turn impossibilities into something resembling satisfaction. And Ja'far's survival record is remarkable only because it is constantly tested, stretched, and occasionally flirted with disaster. He paces slowly along the edge of the hall, each step scraping faintly against the polished marble, mentally cataloging every type of story, anecdote, and rumor he has ever collected, trying to guess which one might amuse the Caliph, or, at the very least, buy him a few hours of safety. It is in these long moments of pacing that Ja'far rehearses the impossible art of distraction, knowing that the night will not pass quietly, and that the first mistake could turn curiosity into anger. And that curiosity, once irritated, is a dangerous companion in a ruler's mind. Every possible scenario spins in his head, from tales of distant lands to accounts of local mischief, each weighed against the ruler's capricious tastes for what delight today might horrify tomorrow. And what seems clever in theory might fall flat with a wrong inflection. Ja'far reminds himself quietly that patience is not merely a virtue, but a necessity, that timing and delivery are as important as wit, and that sometimes the most effective solution is a story that feels natural, even if it is carefully, invisibly contrived behind the veil of casual conversation. As the rain drums softly against the palace windows, Ja'far realizes the night has just begun, and that the task ahead will stretch his mind in unexpected ways, for soon a chest, mysterious and utterly mundane in appearance, will appear, challenging him to unravel a puzzle far more delicate and perilous than any tale he could invent. His thoughts drift briefly to personal comforts, small pleasures he might enjoy when this ordeal is over, and he allows himself a faint smile at the idea that surviving this particular evening will be a minor private victory, though such victories are rarely acknowledged outside the quiet of a vizier's chambers. He straightens his robes, checks that every detail is in order, and prepares for the type of problem that requires attention to subtle clues, the patience of a careful observer, and the steady hand of someone who knows that mistakes here are not merely embarrassing, they can be dangerous. Even in the calm of the marble hall, surrounded by lamps and the soft tapping of rain, Ja'far can feel the invisible weight of expectation pressing down, a gentle but persistent reminder that his wit will soon be tested in ways both clever and cruel. The Tigris flows quietly under the soft drizzle, carrying with it the faint scent of wet reeds, mud, and the occasional waft of smoke from distant kitchens. And, in its gentle current, a small, unassuming chest drifts toward the heart of Baghdad, bobbing just enough to catch the attention of a watchful eye. No one would guess its contents from the outside. The wood is plain, unpolished, and unremarkable, save for the subtle creak it makes as it sways, a sound almost like a warning. Though most passers-by consider it simply part of the river's natural chorus. Fishermen glance at it with mild curiosity, some shrugging, others pointing quietly, and wondering if it is a gift from some merchant or noble. Perhaps an accidental loss or a forgotten delivery, but nobody suspects that this chest will become the center of intrigue, suspicion, and a story that will require the careful attention of Ja'far the Vizier. The city's gentle chaos continues around it. The rain pattering on rooftops, the soft clatter of hooves against cobblestones, and the occasional shout of a street vendor, while the chest drifts steadily onward, indifferent to the importance humans will soon assign to it. It is eventually spotted by a group of guards on patrol who pause briefly, murmuring among themselves about the peculiarity of a chest floating so far from any market. From any place it could have been lost without notice, and it becomes immediately clear that this is no ordinary river debris. For the Tigris seldom carries objects with such singular persistence. Ja'far is summoned. As the guards are polite, but know better than to assume they could decide what to do with a potentially delicate problem. And he arrives with his usual calm, though inwardly his mind begins spinning, considering every possible scenario, every hidden motive, every story that could explain this sudden and mysterious arrival. He studies the chest carefully, noting the crude iron hinges, the slight water damage, and the way the wood has absorbed some of the river's chill. And he wonders not only who it belongs to, but what could be inside, because in a city as curious and lively as Baghdad, any object is potentially a story, and any story is potentially dangerous. Ja'far recalls tales from his own memory, stories of forgotten boxes carrying gold or letters or curses, and while he suppresses a smile, he also knows that one must never underestimate the variety of human folly, which can turn even the smallest object into a matter of life, death, or at least royal discomfort. The vizier carefully examines the chest from all angles, considering whether it might be a simple merchant's mistake or a deliberate puzzle. For such mysteries are not uncommon in Baghdad, and the city has a long history of citizens attempting to impress or confound the caliph with curious gifts or cryptic gestures. He notes the slight swell of water, as if the tiny scratches, as if it had brushed against a silt and mud. And he imagines the journey it must have made to arrive, hears rocks, and the occasional curious, unnoticed, notice in dud, in the kines, permise. Stop to you that into like I make up the you down you deep Ja'far cannot help but feel a small thrill at the idea of a puzzle arriving unbidden, though he tempers it with the knowledge that the Caliph's pleasure is notoriously unpredictable. A mystery deemed clever today may be dismissed as foolish tomorrow, and the Vizier has learned that subtlety is often safer than audacity. He opens the lid slowly, the hinges groaning gently, and peers inside, expecting perhaps gold, perhaps a rare object, perhaps some mundane clothing, but certainly nothing that would make a man's pulse quicken in equal parts horror and fascination. Inside, the chest is smaller than it appears, and at first glance it seems almost empty, save for the careful placement of a single item wrapped in cloth. The fabric is dark, slightly damp from the river, and bears no markings to indicate origin, owner, or purpose, which only heightens the sense of mystery. For in a city as meticulous as Baghdad, the absence of identification, subtle but undeniable, a callous mind races, cataloging the possibilities, a token of affection, a message, a warning, a trap, or something even more mundane, though he knows better than to assume then the mundane will remain so when newsed to the Caliph. He sets the chest on a nearby table, brushing off the last droplets of rain, and carefully unwraps the cloth, revealing the item within, which is not decorative, nor valuable in the conventional sense, nor immediately recognizable as dangerous. And yet, there is an undeniable gravity in the simplicity of its presence. It is, in fact, an apple, singular, pristine, in shape and color, almost absurdly ordinary. And yet, this ordinary object has already carried a journey filled with potential consequences far beyond its humble appearance. The very notion that a fruit could inspire anxiety, suspicion, and intrigue is precisely what makes it a puzzle worthy of the Caliph's attention. Ja'far cannot help but note the contrast. A small, mundane object floating down a great river, capable of commanding the concern of guards, viziers, and ultimately a caliph, simply because human curiosity and imagination will not allow it to be ignored. He recalls the many strange gifts and forgotten items that have passed through Baghdad over the years, and he smiles faintly at the notion that even the most innocuous object can acquire a story, if it drifts far enough into the public eye and lands in the right or wrong hands. As he examines the apple, turning it gently in his hands, he senses the invisible threads of connection spreading outward. Who placed it in the chest? Why it was sent? How it will be perceived by the Caliph? And whether any harm or mischief might accompany its arrival. In the quiet of the hall, punctuated only by the gentle tapping of rain and the distant murmur of city life, Ja'far feels the weight of responsibility pressing on him, as if the simple act of understanding, documenting, and presenting this small object correctly could shape the evening. Perhaps even influence the balance of suspicion and judgment in ways he cannot yet predict. He sits briefly, the chest open before him, and contemplates the delicate dance of explanation and observation that will soon be required. Because a mystery is only as valuable as the attention it receives, and a single misstep in describing or interpreting its journey could escalate minor curiosity into a serious matter. Ja'far imagines the Caliph's expression, his interest piqued by the unexpected arrival, and he rehearses carefully the way he will speak, the words he will choose, the rhythm and pauses that may render the story compelling without revealing too much too soon. The river outside continues its gentle flow, the rain a constant companion, and the city of Baghdad carries on, unaware that a single chest, small, damp, and containing nothing more remarkable than an apple, has begun a story that will touch multiple lives, stir emotions, and challenge the wit of the city's most careful observer. In these quiet moments, Ja'far understands the nature of his role: to untangle human expectation, to navigate rumor, to prepare for the inevitable cascade of speculation, and to do so with patience, discretion, and just enough imagination to satisfy a ruler whose curiosity knows no bounds. Finally, the vizier rises, placing the chest carefully back on the table. Aware that the evening is far from over and that the Caliph will soon demand not only knowledge of the apple, but an explanation for its journey, for its significance, and for the subtle implications it carries, he allows himself a quiet breath, acknowledging both the absurdity and inevitability of the situation, because in Baghdad, ordinary objects often harbor extraordinary stories, and the simplest drift along the Tigris can become a puzzle of royal consequence, requiring the patience, intellect, and gentle cunning of a vizier who understands that every small detail matters, and that sometimes even an apple is far more than it appears. Ja'far leans closer to the chest, the cloth now fully unfolded, revealing the contents in all their unassuming horror, and he feels the weight of anticipation press upon him. For what he sees is neither beautiful nor ordinary, but something so unexpected that it seems almost indecent to place it in the middle of a palace hall. Seemingly innocent sits atop a small bundle, but the bundle's edges betray a human and most composed vizier. Pause and consider the delicate nature of disclosure, because one must balance. Tact is often bereft. He exhales slowly, as if the act of breathing can somehow soften the impact, and begins the careful inspection, noting the small stains on the cloth, the faint odor that clings to it, and the subtle inconsistencies in the way it was wrapped, all of which hint at a story far darker than a floating fruit might suggest. Ja'far's mind races, cataloging possibilities, questioning the journey that brought this chest from river to hall, and wondering how a simple apple could have inspired enough attention to merit such secrecy, such careful packaging, and such potential consequence, because in Baghdad, even trivial matters can ripple outward, touching lives in ways one cannot anticipate. He gently lifts the bundle, revealing the grim truth. Inside is not treasure, nor a note, nor a curious trinket, but a human hand, small, delicate, and unmistakably severed, arranged with the apple in a manner that is at once deliberate and cryptically symbolic. The juxtaposition is shocking, not for its novelty. Human misfortune is sadly familiar, but for its absurdity. The way something so ordinary as an apple can be paired with something so ghastly, creating a puzzle that is simultaneously horrifying, fascinating, and nearly impossible to ignore. The vizier's fingers tremble slightly, not with fear, but with the careful awareness that any sudden movement, any gasp, could escalate the situation unnecessarily, for the Caliph thrives on drama, and the wrong display of emotion could transform inquiry into accusation. Ja'far studies the hand and the apple, noting their placement as if they were arranged with intention, the subtle spacing suggesting a message, a warning, or a story yet untold. And he begins to reconstruct the journey of both items in his mind, imagining the person responsible, the reason behind such a strange composition, and the motives that could intertwine the trivial with the tragic. He cannot help but consider, briefly, the many times in Baghdad's history that small items, coins, letters, fruits, have carried disproportionate meaning. And he reflects on the strange human tendency to assign importance, sometimes fatal importance, to objects that are, in themselves, entirely neutral. The guards hover nearby, trying to suppress their expressions of shock, and Ja'far reminds himself quietly that they are useful witnesses, but their reactions must be managed because human emotion, once provoked, spreads like fire, and in the palace, fire is rarely contained without careful attention and a deft hand. He straightens the chest, adjusts the cloth with meticulous precision, and prepares mentally to describe the scene, knowing that the story must be conveyed with accuracy, gravity, and enough subtlety to prevent panic, while still satisfying the Caliph's insatiable curiosity for the dramatic and the unusual. He pauses to consider the possibilities. Was the hand a message, a punishment, a misguided gift, or a macabre prank? Was the apple intended as a symbol of health, temptation, or absurdity? Could this be a murder, an accident, or something so convoluted that only careful inquiry will reveal the truth? Each thought branches into countless scenarios, each more elaborate than the last, and Ja'far begins the delicate mental mapping of motives, suspects, and timing, because in a city as complex and intertwined as Baghdad, nothing exists in isolation, and even the simplest object may connect to a web of events till observed with patience and attention. He imagines the Caliph's inevitable questions. How did it arrive here? Who is responsible? What does it signify? And he rehearses in his mind the answers he will provide, balancing honesty with discretion, clarity with dramatic flair, knowing that the manner of delivery is as important as the facts themselves. The vizier's role is not merely to observe, but to translate reality into narrative. And in this moment, he recognizes the profound responsibility of turning a grotesque scene into a story that informs without inflaming, that satisfies curiosity without provoking chaos. The rain continues its gentle rhythm outside, a subtle percussion against the palace windows, and in this quiet, Ja'far feels the weight of the city pressing inward. For Baghdad itself is a participant in this mystery, its river carrying secrets and objects alike, its streets buzzing with rumors yet to be formed, its people unaware that a singular apple in a severed hand will soon ripple outward, touching lives, shaping suspicion, and forcing action. He recognizes in this moment of that human imagination as assumptions are often fatal, and that patience, observation, and reason are essential, irsention, or senus, bentras, bentro, backwards, and inksad, bendri, reading we you say you have you could go mad if you more you up take use it. He touches the hand lightly, enough to assess that it is indeed human and that it bears no immediate signs of decay, indicating that whatever tragedy befell the owner occurred recently, perhaps within the last day or two. And he begins to piece together the timeline of events with the precision of a scholar and the caution of a man who understands that each detail may carry immense consequence. The apple, contrastingly pristine, offers no clues beyond its freshness, and yet, in combination with the hand, it becomes a symbol of enigma, a question mark floating in plain sight, careful enough to decipher the story behind it. He looks up at the guards again, nodding subtly, signaling them to maintain composure, and reminds himself that the Caliph's arrival will soon transform this private inspection into a public demonstration of wit, diplomacy, and subtle authority, for the vizier's reputation depends not only on knowledge, but on performance, on the ability to interpret, narrate, and navigate human curiosity and fear. Each movement is deliberate, each gesture calculated, and each pause measured, because in these moments, the line between competence and catastrophe is incredibly thin, and the smallest misstep can cascade into consequence. Ja'far finally steps back, taking in the scene as a whole. The chest, the apple, the hand, and the guards. Realizing that he is now the custodian of a story that is both tragic and absurd, and that it is his responsibility to translate its significance to the Caliph without provoking undue alarm. He prepares himself to narrate, to explain, to infer, and to observe, knowing that the next steps will determine not only the resolution of this mystery, but potentially the perception of his own judgment and prudence, which, after all, are the tools that have kept him alive and respected in the court. As the evening deepens, the rain continues to drum softly against the palace tiles, and the city outside carries on, unaware of the strange cargo that has entered its heart. Ja'far remains vigilant, mindful of the delicate balance between curiosity and consequence, reality and interpretation, the mundane and the macabre, because in Baghdad, the most ordinary objects can conceal the most extraordinary tales, and the smallest details often hold the greatest power to shape events, emotions, and decisions. In these quiet moments before the Caliph's inquiry begins, Ja'far reflects on the unpredictable nature of human affairs, on the absurdity and fragility of life, and on the subtle, twisting path that connects a single apple and a severed hand to the broader currents of curiosity, suspicion, and justice, knowing that every careful observation, every measured word, and every patient thought will be essential in guiding the evening toward clarity, resolution, and perhaps a small sense of order amidst the chaos that is both inevitable and necessary in life, and life in life lies lie The Caliph, upon hearing of the mysterious chest and its macabre contents, leans forward on his throne, eyes narrowing in a way that suggests both curiosity and impatience. And Ja'far senses immediately that the evening will require more than careful observation. It will demand rapid wit, meticulous deduction, and perhaps a touch of improvisation. The guards shift slightly under the weight of expectation. The lamps flicker as if acknowledging the tension, and even the soft patter of rain against the palace windows seems to carry the hushed anticipation or perform, waiting for the vizier to perform the delicate task of comprehension. The Caliph's voice cuts through the gentle hum of the evening, low and deliberate, as he sets a deadline. 3 days! 3 days for Ja'far to unravel the story behind the chest. To explain the apple and the severed hand, to determine the who, the why, and the how, or risk facing consequences that, while often tempered by the vizier's cleverness, are never trivial in their impact. Ja'far feels the familiar tightening in his chest, a mixture of dread, and he recognizes immediately that this is a test of both intellect and nerve. For the caliph's deadlines are precise, is not infinite. The vizier paces, hands clasped behind his back, tracing careful patterns in the polished marble floor, thinking through the possibilities with methodical precision, weighing every scenario, every rumor, every conceivable connection, because the challenge is not only to solve the puzzle, but to do so in a way that satisfies the ruler's appetite for drama, order, and satisfaction. He considers the guards, the palace staff, even the minor merchants and fishermen who might have inadvertently contributed to the chest's journey, realizing that in Baghdad, no element exists in isolation, and the most mundane details often carry hidden significance when interpreted correctly. Ja'far reviews the chest and its contents again, noting the arrangement of the apple and hand, the dampness of the cloth, and the faint traces of mud and river sediment that hint at its voyage. He knows that understanding the journey is as critical as understanding the object itself, for the river's currents, human intervention, and chance all intertwine to create the circumstances that now demand explanation. He imagines mapping the Tigris in his mind, considering where the chest could have originated, which boats or bridges it might have passed it, and every step forms a chain of reasoning that must ultimately converge in a coherent story suitable for the caliph's ears. The vizier reflects on human behavior, the peculiar ways people act when curiosity, fear, and secrecy combine, and he begins to outline, mentally, the list of individuals who might have had motive, opportunity, or knowledge of the chest's contents, knowing that suspicion is both a tool and a hazard, because misjudgment can lead to misplaced accusations, ruined reputations, or worse. He rehearses possible explanations, each more intricate than the last, weighing which will satisfy the caliph's love of logic and narrative elegance, and which might inspire confusion or doubt, all while keeping the truth intact, or at least partially intact, to preserve the integrity of justice. But the real intrigue with the weed of Canid will compete with we slew so we be we out use the we you make do see to move so people. Outside the palace, the city carries on, oblivious to the growing tension within the grand halls, and Ja'far draws a quiet parallel between the calm surface of the Tigris and the hidden turbulence of palace intrigue, recognizing that appearances can deceive, that even the simplest object can carry stories of great consequence, and that his task is to illuminate these hidden threads without disturbing the delicate balance of perception. He considers the possible repercussions of failure, acknowledging that deadlines from a ruler such as the Caliph are not merely administrative, but deeply entwined with power, reputation that govern human interaction within the palace. The vizier also contemplates the absurdity of the situation. A single apple, a severed hand, and 3 days to untangle what could easily be a series of coincidental events. Yet, in the Caliph's view, coincidence is rarely enough. Every object, every action, every nuance is imbued with potential meaning. And Ja'far must navigate this landscape with care, patience, and a certain detachment that allows him to analyze without succumbing to panic. The challenge is equal parts puzzle and performance, requiring a mind that can deduce, an eye that can observe, and a voice that can narrate events convincingly. He begins to sketch the logical possibilities in his mind, mapping sequences of events, potential suspects, and the ways in which rumor or misinterpretation might have shaped the chest's journey. Noting that human error, accident, and malice often overlap in unpredictable ways, complicating any straightforward conclusion. Each hypothesis is considered, discarded, refined, or merged with others, forming a mental tapestry that reflects both the complexity of human behavior and the simplicity of the objects involved. Because an apple and a hand, while tangible, are only the surface of a much deeper depth, is what the Caliph craves most. He reflects on past challenges, recalling nights when a minor theft, a lost letter, or a misdelivered message required hours of explanation, negotiation, and subtle persuasion, and he recognizes that those experiences, while tedious at the time, have honed his ability to remain calm, methodical, and observant in moments of high stakes. Tonight, however, is unlike any previous challenge because it combines elements of horror, absurdity, and urgency, demanding not only intellect but also creativity. And Ja'far knows that his success will depend on balancing these aspects with the precision of a scholar and the discretion of a diplomat. As the rain continues its soft percussion on the palace windows, Ja'far sets a plan. He will gather information from anyone who might have seen the chest along the river, question the guards about any unusual activity, observe the physical details of the apple and hand for clues, and prepare a narrative that traces the journey from origin to discovery. He considers the possibility of deception, misdirection, or deliberate tampering, and notes that human nature, with its propensity for secrecy and exaggeration, may complicate even the most careful investigation. Each thought is catalogued, prioritized, and rehearsed because, in this delicate balance, preparation is the only safeguard against error, and time, though generous in hours, is measured strictly in exquent, bebu in light. We can we rement to we you I you we you we you we you we know you expect to have to did obeyed oh I met we lift the did we must that Finally, Ja'far allows himself a quiet, controlled sigh, acknowledging both the gravity and absurdity of the task ahead. And he prepares mentally to navigate the next 3 days with the diligence, patience, and ingenuity that have defined his career as vizier. The city outside remains unaware of the unfolding drama. The rain continues its rhythmic tapping, and the chest waits silently in the hall, a simple object that has become the nexus of intrigue, reminding Ja'far, as all extraordinary objects do, that even the smallest things can carry the weight of expectation. You will may it in be me to we cow we responsibility and consequence when placed in the right or wrong hands. Ja'far sits quietly in his chambers, reviewing the information he has gathered over the past hours, and he knows that the next step requires more than observation. It requires listening to human emotion, understanding relationships, and navigating the subtle tensions that often accompany affection, jealousy, and suspicion. The city hums faintly beyond the palace walls. The gentle patter of rain against windows providing a soothing counterpoint to the tension inside, reminding him that life, in all its complexity, continues, regardless of royal deadlines or mysterious chests, and that the human heart is often far more intricate than any puzzle laid before him. He arranges a meeting with a man who claims knowledge of the chest's origins, a husband whose story seems, at first, ordinary, but whose demeanor suggests layers of complication, unease, and careful concealment. The husband enters quietly, hands slightly trembling, and Ja'far notes every detail, the way his eyes dart, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the careful choice of words that seem rehearsed yet betray the anxiety beneath. It is in these small gestures Ja'far knows that the truth often hides, and that the careful observer can find more in the pauses and glances than in any direct statement. The husband begins his confession slowly, his voice measured but tinged with regret, recounting the events leading up to the chest's arrival. A tale that involves a rare apple, a journey through the city, and a wife whose health and whims have shaped many of his actions in ways both deliberate and inadvertent. Ja'far listens, noting inconsistencies and subtle hints. Because in confessions, as in stories, the smallest detail can reveal far more than the central narrative, and the mind must be alert to interpret what is left unsaid as much as what is spoken. The man's words weave a narrative of love, care, miscommunications, illustrating how enormous consequences, illustrating how human emotion often complicates even the simplest of safest usnets. We insent, we instu, ginats, kani you can see, can you to you. Ah, you to you to they have me. I you say back at you if to equal states. The apple, central to the story, is revealed not merely as fruit, but as a symbol, a gift, and ultimately an unintended instrument of suspicion and misfortune, because in Baghdad, symbols carry weight and meaning far beyond their physical presence. And intentions, however innocent, can be easily misinterpreted. The husband explains that the fruit was intended to please his wife, to comfort her during an illness, and that, in his attempt to procure something rare and delightful, he inadvertently set himself reputations and the perception of justice and the perception of justice itself. Ja'far, a simple act of kindness, has become or royal scrutiny, and he mentally prepares like we you it we and strike you I could use the books the He probes gently, asking questions that are both subtle and deliberate, designed to reveal more than what is directly offered. Because, in confessions, the shape of a story is often more important than the words themselves. The husband hesitates, recounting details of his journey, the stops he made along the Tigris, the individuals he encountered, and the minor accidents that might have contributed to misunderstanding or misperception. Each point is catalogued, considered, and stored in Ja'far's mind, forming a mental map of human interaction, coincidence, and the unpredictable consequences of everyday decisions in a city as lively and interconnected as Baghdad. The vizier notes the husband's emotional state carefully, observing how guilt, worry, and love intermingle, shaping his perception of events and influencing the narrative he offers. It is clear that the man is honest in intention, yet flawed in execution, and Ja'far understands that human error, when combined with rumor, fear, and imagination, is capable of producing confusion, misjudgment, and, ultimately, suspicion that can be as dangerous as any physical threat. The story, as it unfolds, becomes not only about the apple and the chest, but about human nature, the fragility of trust, and the ease with which misunderstanding can escalate into tragedy. The husband recounts, in halting and careful detail, how he placed the apple in the chest intended for delivery to his wife. Yet, unaware of the potential for misinterpretation, the possibility of theft, or the consequences of accidental delay, Ja'far listens intently, noting the precise sequence of actions, the timing, and the human emotions that influenced each step, understanding that in a mystery such as this, the ordinary often carries the weight of the extraordinary. He imagines the chest drifting along the Tigris, past observers unaware of its significance, and non-so, anxiety, anticipation, and the invisible threads of human connection that now demand careful scrutiny. The story grows more intricate as the husband explains minor accidents along the route. A dropped coin, a startled passerby, and a fleeting moment of miscommunication that, together, contributed to the eventual confusion surrounding the chest. Ja'far recognizes the familiar pattern. Small details, seemingly insignificant in isolation, combine to create outcomes that appear almost inevitable in hindsight. A reminder that human life is a delicate web of cause and effect, and that understanding the consequences and careful attention. He pauses occasionally, allowing the husband to gather composure, and reflects quietly on the broader implications of the narrative. Recognizing that the situation illustrates universal truths. Love can inspire action. Suspicion can magnify error, and ordinary objects, like an apple, can acquire extraordinary significance when combined with human emotion and curiosity. The story becomes a lesson in humility, observation, and the subtle complexity of daily life, demonstrating that justice, perception, and understanding are often more complicated than they appear, and that resolution requires insight, patience, and empathy. The confession continues, revealing the man's fear, his hope for understanding, and his desperate desire to prevent harm, not only to himself but to others who might be implicated through misperception. Ja'far notes how guilt and concern are intertwined, shaping narrative choices, coloring facts, and influencing timing. And he carefully stores each nuance, recognizing that these human elements are as critical to resolving the mystery as the physical evidence itself. The apple, the chest, and the hand are simply objects. It is the web of relationships, choices, and consequences that gives them true significance. And Ja'far prepares to translate this understanding for the Caliph. Finally, the husband concludes his story, leaving no detail unmentioned, no emotion unexplored. And Ja'far sits back, considering the implications. The apple was never intended as a weapon. The chest was a vehicle of kindness gone awry, and human misunderstanding amplified the ordinary into the extraordinary. It is a reminder, he notes quietly, that sometimes the most perplexing mysteries are born not of malice or criminal intent, but of ordinary life, love, and the fragile balance between intention and perception. As the evening deepens, Ja'far reflects on the confession, cataloging every word, gesture, and nuance, understanding that it is now his task to reconcile these human emotions with the facts, to present a story that satisfies the caliph's curiosity, and to ensure that justice, however idiosyncratic, is tempered by reason and compassion. The city hums, continues its steady rhythm, and in these moments of reflection, Ja'far appreciates the subtle truth of human experience, that the simplest act, guided by affection and ordinary intention, can ripple outward, producing intrigue, fear, and wonder far beyond every over effort I read. By the bia me you re you b b t you b the u c t u t to as t you to and go you to you die I ace so I get a famous or you can sing it I there the I go tap a mac do go away I got the purple book to pass you but you had on fire. So Ja'far sits quietly with the husband, considering the story he has just heard, and he realizes that the simplest explanation rarely satisfies either curiosity or royal expectation. The apple, once thought a trivial fruit, is now part of a narrative that connects love, illness, secrecy, and human error in ways both intricate and absurd. The city hums faintly outside the palace walls, the rain still pattering softly against the windows, and Ja'far allows himself a moment to imagine the chest to river, carrying with it consequences that the original giver could never have anticipated, and illustrating how ordinary objects can bear extraordinary weight when combined with human intention. He begins to explain to the husband, and later to the court, that there were in fact 3 apples, each with its own story, each with its own place in the chain of events, and that understanding this triad is essential to untangling the confusion that has arisen. The first apple, as previously discussed, was a gift to the wife, chosen for its rarity and its supposed medicinal qualities, intended to bring health, joy, and a minor distraction from illness. Yet it became the seed of misunderstanding, because human perception, like the river, carries currents of misinterpretation that transforms the ordinary into the alarming. The second apple, Ja'far explains, belonged to a neighbor, a man with his own curiosity and penchant for gossip, who had witnessed part of the chest's journey and drawn conclusions based on incomplete information, assumptions, and an overactive imagination. It is, he notes, a subtle illustration of how human observation, untempered by full knowledge, can amplify confusion, turning minor coincidence into apparent causality, and setting the stage for accusations, anxiety, and small but consequential errors. The neighbor's apple, therefore, is not merely a fruit, but a symbol of the ripple effect of misunderstanding, demonstrating rumor and assumption have a power, and assumption. The third apple, Ja'far continues, is perhaps the most curious of all, for it was intended as a replacement, a backup gift, a second attempt to provide comfort or delight, yet in its misplacement, timing, and handling, it too became entwined with a narrative of suspicion, connecting with the severed hand and the floating chest to produce a tableau that demanded investigation, explanation, and delicate handling. Ja'far emphasizes that this third apple, though seemingly innocuous, completes the sequence, illustrating the compounding nature of human actions that often arise from even the simplest decisions, particularly when guided by concern, love, or haste. He gestures to the chest, now open and carefully examined, and notes how each apple, each layer of wrapping, each movement along the tigress forms a story that is part fact, part interpretation, and part human imagination. The journey of the three apples, combined with a severed hand, creates a narrative rich in complexity, irony, and the subtle interplay of intention and consequence. And Ja'far reflects that, while the objects themselves are tangible and simple, their significance is entirely constructed through human perception, error, and emotion, a truth as old as Baghdad itself. The Vizier recounts the sequence in detail. The first apple, intended for the sick wife, was packaged carefully, dropped into the chest, and released onto the river, a gesture meant for kindness, yet resulting in alarm. The second apple, seen by the neighbor and misinterpreted, became evidence in a story of theft, misunderstanding, and rumor. The third apple, introduced as a later corrective measure, intersects with human curiosity, fear, and assumption to complete the narrative chain, revealing how the ordinary can be transformed into extraordinary consequence. Ja'far explains that the confusion surrounding the three apples demonstrates a critical lesson in observation and inference, namely, that objects themselves are rarely dangerous or mysterious, but human reaction to them, shaped by assumption, expectation, and emotion, imbues them with significance. He reflects on how minor details, a slight, like bent leaf, a hesitant glance scan, amplify misunderstanding, illustrating the fragility of perception and the ease with which innocence can be misread as guilt, simplicity as complexity, and kindness as malice, particularly as watchful and lively as Baghdad. The husband listens intently, absorbing the layers of interpretation, realizing that his small gestures, intended for love and comfort, have been magnified through observation, rumor, and coincidence into a story that now requires careful explanation, judgment, and intervention. Ja'far gently emphasizes that the truth, while simple in essence, often requires detailed unpacking to reconcile human expectation with reality, to prevent injustice, and to transform alarm into understanding, a task for which both patience and subtlety are essential. The Vizier also notes the importance of timing, the interval between each apple, the journey along the river, the observations of neighbors and guards, and the eventual presentation to the Caliph all influence perception, illustrating that context is as crucial as content in understanding events. Each apple, therefore, is more than fruit. Each is a node in a network of human interaction, emotion, and chance, demonstrating how even minor objects, when combined with human behavior, can generate consequences far beyond their physical nature, and require careful interpretation by those tasked with resolving mystery and maintaining justice. He recounts the interplay of intention and misunderstanding with gentle humor, noting how the simplest actions, buying fruit, wrapping it, sending it along a river can cascade into drama, suspicion, and near tragedy, and how human tendency to interpret, speculate, and assign meaning ensures that nothing in Baghdad is ever as simple as it seems. Ja'far emphasizes that these three apples are simultaneously mundane and critical, a reminder that the smallest objects, when acted upon with care, curiosity, or error, can become central to the unfolding of human stories, a truth that is often overlooked but deeply significant. Finally, Ja'far reflects on the broader lesson that understanding, patience, and careful observation are essential in unraveling the apparent complexity of events, and that, while the three apples themselves are harmless, their journey and the human reactions they inspire demonstrate how ordinary life is interwoven with perception, assumption, and consequence. He notes that the Caliph's curiosity, the husband's intention, the neighbor's observation, and the river's currents all converge in the simplest act of giving an apple can require wisdom, diplomacy, and patience to resolve, and patience to resolve, bin moment, go, into can we, into grant, you, You we you see to ki you to you the see you pals I go my succumb to stuff you made a comedy based boots. The story of the three apples, when fully understood, reveals a tapestry of human emotion, coincidence, and interpretation, highlighting that objects alone do not carry meaning. It is people who shape narrative, amplify concern, and transform simple gestures into matters of intrigue and consequence. Ja'far understands that his role is not only to explain what occurred, but also to convey the subtlety and interconnectedness of human action, ensuring that justice, perception, and understanding are balanced delicately, and that the absurdity and fragility of life are acknowledged alongside the need for resolution, clarity, and closure. Ja'far observes the city from his chambers, watching the ordinary bustle of Baghdad's streets ripple quietly against the backdrop of a stormy evening. And he reflects on how easily human perception distorts reality, especially rumor and assumption intermingle, creating a fog of misunderstanding that can obscure even the simplest of truths. The guards, merchants, and passers-by carry on with their routines, unaware that a single apple, a chest, and a severed hand have become the subject of palace intrigue, and that their observations, however minor or incidental, may already be feeding into a narrative that grows more spur and idle comment. Word of the floating chest spreads subtly through the neighborhood, carried by market-goers and boatmen, each retelling flavored by personal interpretation, exaggeration, or the occasional embellishment. And in this slow diffusion, the story begins to warp, diverge, and multiply, illustrating the curious human tendency to assign meaning where none was intended, and to imagine motive where circumstance is entirely innocent. Ja'far notes the patterns, cataloging both fact and speculation, aware that misunderstanding is a living, breathing thing that gains strength fastest when unchecked, a lesson he has learned many times in his careful navigation of the caliph's court. The husband's confession, while clarifying his intentions, only partially tempers the rumors circulating outside. For people notice what is convenient, repeat what is dramatic, and omit what seems mundane, leaving fragments of truth mixed with conjecture, suspicion, and fear, forming a composite narrative that begins to take on a life of its own. Understanding that the story has now expanded beyond the immediate participants, that perception and imagination are as potent as fact, and that resolving the situation will require management of social perception, rumor, and inference. Neighbors discuss the chest and its contents in hushed tones, piecing together fragments of observation with their own suppositions, and the simplest details, the appearance of the chest. The smallness of the apple, the mysterious hand, become exaggerated symbols of mystery and danger, prompting conjecture that ranges from theft to murder to divine intervention. Ja'far recognizes in this spontaneous narrative creation the very essence of misunderstanding, a complex interplay of observation, imagination, and incomplete knowledge, in which the simplest objects are transformed into carriers of moral, social, and emotional significance far beyond their physical nature. He reflects on the nature of suspicion itself, how easily it spreads when combined with fear, curiosity, and the desire to know more than one actually does, and how the human mind fills gaps in understanding with assumptions, often producing conclusions that are not only incorrect, but also socially disruptive. The apple, the hand, and the chest have become focal points for this phenomenon, each acting as a catalyst for speculation, gossip, demonstrating how even minor incidents can ripple outward into complex networks with consequences that are disproportionate to the original act. Within the palace, Ja'far observes subtle shifts in attitude as servants, guards, and minor officials begin to whisper, speculate, and ask questions, each eager to understand the significance of the chest before being told, each interpreting silence as evidence and assumption as fact. He notes how the same piece of information can generate multiple divergent narratives depending on who hears it, when, and in what context, and he understands that these social currents must be managed carefully, because the caliph's perception will be influenced by both the facts he is told and the stories that have already circulated within the palace walls. The vizier recognizes the absurdity and inevitability of human misperception, acknowledging that even his careful explanations, though accurate, may be interpreted differently depending on the listener's expectations, biases, and imagination. He prepares mentally to deliver information with clarity and precision, aware that the subtleties of tone, sequence, and emphasis can shape how the story is received, and that even small gestures or hesitations can alter the audience's perception of truth, responsibility, and consequence. Ja'far also considers the role of timing in misunderstanding. When information arrives, in what order and to whom, for the sequence of revelation often determines the story people construct. A detail introduced too early may be misinterpreted. Too late, and the narrative fills the gap with conjecture. Too much emphasis may incite panic, while too little may breed continued speculation. The floating chest, the apples, and the hand are now entwined with human perception and social dynamics. And it is this interaction between tangible reality and human interpretation, one which Ja'far must unravel with patience, skill, and subtlety. Rumors begin to touch individuals far removed from the original events. As market-goers mention the chest to friends, friends to family, and family to others, producing a cascading effect of half-truths, speculation, and invention. Ja'far understands the power of such ripples. What begins as curiosity becomes assumption. What begins as observation becomes judgment. And what begins as a simple event becomes a potential blame, suspicion, and social consequence. In this way, the ordinary apple becomes both symbol and agent of human misunderstanding. A simple object transformed by imagination and context into a matter of intrigue and concern. He also notes the ways in which assumptions amplify misunderstanding. The husband's intentions are misread. The neighbor's observation is exaggerated. The guard's quiet reactions are interpreted as knowledge of secret wrongdoing, and the story becomes a mosaic of facts, guesses, and imaginative leaps, all interacting to create a narrative far more complicated than the events themselves. Ja'far recognizes, but inherent to human nature, people seek patterns, assign meaning, and fill gaps in understanding with their own interpretations. A process that is both useful and dangerous, illuminating and confounding, depending on circumstance. The vizier prepares strategies to manage the misunderstanding, considering whom to speak with, what details to emphasize, and how to guide interpretation without suppressing truth. He understands that intervention must balance clarity with diplomacy, explanation with subtlety, and information with timing, because mismanagement could transform minor confusion into serious social or political consequence. Once allowed to grow unchecked, can escalate rapidly, and that his role is not merely to uncover the truth, but to shepherd perception toward accurate understanding, a task as delicate and consequential as any investigation itself. Finally, Ja'far notes that the misunderstanding, while troublesome, is also instructive. It demonstrates the fragility of perception, the potency of rumor, and the subtle ways in which human emotion and expectation shape narrative, influence action, and even determine consequence. The chest, the hand, and the apples serve as physical anchors in a storm of speculation, reminding him and anyone who observes carefully that truth is not only what occurs, but also what is perceived, interpreted, and communicated, and that human misjudgment as intention, action, or chance. As evening deepens, the city outside the palace continues its quiet rhythm. The rain a constant background, and Ja'far remains vigilant, cataloging observation, inference, and rumor. Understanding that the interplay of human imagination, assumption, and incomplete knowledge will require careful management, measured explanation, and the judicious application of insight, diplomacy, and timing, because in Baghdad, misunderstanding is inevitable, but resolution, if handled correctly, is within reach. Ja'far now turns his attention to the most grievous part of the story, the element that has cast a shadow over the floating chest and the 3 apples, the tragic murder. An event that seems almost inevitable once misunderstanding and suspicion have taken root, and yet, upon closer inspection, reveals layers of human error, emotion, and misfortune that complicate any simple explanation. The palace remains hushed, the rain a soft percussion on the windows, and the vizier reflects that, in Baghdad, even a single misstep or a misinterpreted gesture can have consequences far beyond what anyone could anticipate, particularly when human emotion entwines with delicate and delicate and cadence, and that's we so we do you we you 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 she be it to me how you skunted to food of the you I see the victim, a man whose identity has been obscured by rumor and misperception, was caught in a web of jealousy, misunderstanding, and assumption, illustrating how easily ordinary motives fear of losing favor, concern for loved ones, or irritation at perceived slights can escalate into irreversible action. Ja'far traces the sequence carefully, noting the interactions, the observations, and the small misunderstandings that combined like puzzle pieces to produce a tragedy, understanding that what appears obvious at first glance is rarely the full truth, and that careful attention to context, timing, and human behavior is essential to grasp the reality. He recounts the events leading to the murder, starting with minor tensions over the apples, the husband's intention to provide comfort, the neighbor's observation of the chest, and the growing whispers that painted motives in shades far darker than reality. Each fragment of information misinterpreted, magnified, and passed along until perception itself became a catalyst for conflict. Ja'far considers how rumor, once started, gains momentum, shaping emotion, driving action, and ultimately transforming ordinary circumstances into extraordinary consequence, demonstrating the precarious balance between human intention and social perception, and the tragic outcomes is lost. The victim, drawn into the situation by coincidence and circumstance, reacts to perceived insult, misjudges intent, and allows emotion to override reason, creating a moment where judgment falters and violence emerges as a solution to a problem that exists only in assumption. Ja'far observes the mechanics of this transformation, how fear, suspicion, and social pressure converge in a single instant, producing decisions that can never be reversed, and how the simplest misunderstanding, apple misdelivered, a glance misread, can analyze irreversible consequence. The story is both horrifying and instructive, a cautionary tale of human error compounded by circumstance. He notes the subtle but significant role of perception. Each participant sees only fragments of reality, interprets them according to personal fears and desires, and constructs a narrative that justifies action, regardless of whether the action is rational, necessary, or kind. In this context, the murder is not merely a physical act, but the culmination of assumption, rumor, and misperceived intent, an inevitable consequence of the social dynamics that envelop the chest, the apples, and the human participants, demonstrating how ordinary circumstances can spiral into tragedy when emotion supersedes reason. Ja'far considers the emotional dynamics at play: jealousy, fear, anxiety, and miscommunication, noting how each emotion contributes to the final act, often in subtle ways that might be overlooked in a cursory examination. The victim's reaction, though seemingly extreme, is understandable within the context of perceived threats and imagined insults, and the vizier reflects that, in human affairs, perception often carries more weight than reality, shaping behavior, influencing decision-making, and ultimately determining outcome in ways that are invisible until retrospect provides clarity. The role of timing is critical. The sequence of events, from the chest's arrival to the appearance of the apples, from observation to rumor, converged precisely to create a scenario where tragedy became plausible. Ja'far traces these moments with care, analyzing the intervals, interactions, and subtle cues that pushed the situation toward its inevitable climax. And he notes that the orchestration of chance, human emotion, and circumstance as delicate as any crafted plan, though far less predictable, and requires insight, patience, and empathy to understand fully. He also reflects on the absurdity inherent in the situation. A series of coincidences surrounding apples and a chest has escalated to murder. A reminder that human emotion, rumor, and assumption often magnify ordinary objects into agents of extraordinary consequence. The juxtaposition is both tragic and strangely ironic, emphasizing that human behavior is rarely rational, that perception shapes reality, and that what seems obvious, and jealousy or revenge, is often rooted in a complex web of miscommunication, coincidence, and misjudged intention. Ja'far catalogs each participant's perspective carefully. The husband, whose intention was innocent, yet whose actions inadvertently contributed to misunderstanding. The neighbors, whose observations were partial and influenced by speculation. And the victim, whose reaction crystallized rumor into irreversible action. By mapping these perspectives, Ja'far illustrates how tragedy is rarely the product of a single individual's choice, but the result of intersecting motives, incomplete information, and social pressure. A network of human factors converging to produce an outcome that is simultaneously predictable and heartbreaking. He reflects on the moral ambiguity of the situation. Who is truly at fault, and what constitutes responsibility when action arises from misunderstanding rather than malice? Ja'far notes that in the eyes of the Caliph, and indeed in the broader social context, justice must reconcile intent, consequence, and perception, balancing punishment with understanding, caution with accountability, and human frailty with societal expectation, a task that requires wisdom, patience, and an acute awareness of nuance. The narrative also serves as a lesson in caution. The simplest actions can ripple outward. The smallest gestures can acquire exaggerated significance, and human emotion can transform ordinary events into crises. Ja'far notes that observation, patience, and careful interpretation are essential in preventing such misunderstandings, emphasizing that the failure to notice subtle cues, the failure to question assumptions, and the failure to communicate clearly can all contribute to tragedy, a timeless lesson in the interplay between human perception and consequence. He emphasizes to the Caliph, quietly and carefully, that the murder, while tragic, is not the product of deliberate malice, but of human imperfection, circumstance, and the compounding effects of rumor, assumption, and misperception. The story is both a cautionary tale and a testament to the complexity of human affairs. Objects like apples and chests are innocent in themselves. Yet, when entwined with emotion, observation, and circumstance, they can become catalysts for events far larger than their size suggests. Finally, Ja'far reflects on the broader implications. The tragic murder illustrates the importance of careful observation and the fragile interplay between intention and perception, showing that human life, with its emotions, errors, and assumptions, is infinitely more complex than appearances suggest, and that even a single object, handled innocently, can become central to a cascade of events that shape the course of multiple lives in ways that are subtle, instructive, and profoundly human. Ja'far now turns his attention to the role of the slave, a figure often overlooked in the larger narrative, yet whose actions, knowledge, and lack of tact have contributed significantly to the unfolding confusion, illustrating that even minor participants in human affairs can have outsized influence, whether intentional or accidental. The city beyond the palace remains calm in appearance, the soft rain continuing its steady rhythm, and Ja'far reflects that in Baghdad, the smallest detailed glance, a whispered word, or a casual movement can alter momentum and escalate, miscalate, and shape events. making attention, being aching at caning, and get and pew indes. Aug to ignite and taking that temping that me to we you pe we. You like you today, yes, and you this, you that way. Soft make his big to we make his knees. The slave, a young man of keen observation but limited discretion, had been present at several key moments, noticing the husband's preparation of the apple, observing the chest being set afloat, and witnessing interactions that, while minor in themselves, were interpreted later by others as significant evidence. Ja'far notes the duality of the slave's position. He possesses critical information, authority, or social acumen to manage that information effectively, resulting in a cascade of disclosures that inflame suspicion, generate gossip, and create new avenues for misunderstanding, highlighting how knowledge without knowledge, highlighting how Night, Candra, Sandra, you, Bernade, Ewell, co-read, Benend, Command, P. Benelli, you, I, do, I, do, you, to you, we, you, except, Ja'far recalls questioning the slave, noting how carefully he selects words, often revealing more than he intends through gestures, hesitation, or unintended emphasis, illustrating that in storytelling and investigation alike, the medium of communication is as important as the content. The young man's observations are accurate, detailed, and valuable, yet without context or discretion. They become fuel for rumor and misinterpretation, and explanation are intertwined, and that understanding events requires both information and careful interpretation. A lesson the Vizier applies to both the current situation and his broader experience in courtly affairs. The slave's missteps, while minor in isolation, interact with other human tendencies, curiosity, assumption, fear, and rumor to magnify their impact, creating a network of misunderstanding in which truth, half-truth, and speculation intermingle. Ja'far considers the inevitability of such interactions in social networks, recognizing that small contributions can ripple outward, influencing perception, shaping decisions, and creating unintended consequences, and that even those with no formal authority or intention to deceive can become pivotal players in complex events, particularly when human emotion and misunderstanding are involved. He notes a particular incident: the slave witnessing the husband placing the apple in the chest. Comments aloud in a manner intended to share observation, but inadvertently suggesting malice, theft, or error, illustrating how minor slips in phrasing or emphasis can radically alter interpretation. And a routine act into a crisis demanding is often a matter of tone, timing, and audience, and that human behavior, when combined with incomplete knowledge, can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, the innocent into the suspect, and a routine act into a crisis and revelation. The vizier also observes that the slave, like many human participants, is influenced by social hierarchy, expectation, and fear. He speaks selectively, reveals details cautiously. This combination of insight, discretion, and naivety produces a narrative effect that is as powerful as any deliberate action. And Ja'far recognizes the necessity of accounting for human factors when reconstructing events, balancing the objective facts with the social, emotional, and psychological dimensions suitable for both the caliph and those implicated in the unfolding drama. Ja'far reflects on the lessons to be drawn from the slave's behavior, that knowledge without wisdom can inflame tension, that observation without context can mislead, and that human interpretation, whether deliberate or inadvertent, is a critical component in the chain of consequence. He notes that in this case, the slave's actions were unintentional yet pivotal, illustrating that moral judgment, social consequence, and practical responsibility are often distributed across many individuals, each contributing in minor ways to an outcome that appears at first glance, yet in reality is shaped by layers, and perception. The slave also serves as a reminder of human fallibility. His intentions are good. His observation is precise. Yet, his lack of judgment amplifies misunderstanding, showing that even well-meaning participants can unintentionally contribute to confusion, misinterpretation, and conflict. Ja'far uses this as a teaching point for the caliph and the court, emphasizing that justice, insight, and intervention require consideration of knowledge and circumstance, and that the role of minor actors in the social ecosystem can be as consequential as that of kings, viziers, or victims, particularly in complex situation, outweighs material fact. He considers the chain of events initiated or influenced by the slave, noticing the husband's apple, commenting to neighbors, providing details to palace staff, and unintentionally shaping the flow of rumor. Each act is small, yet cumulative, creating an effect disproportionate to its individual significance, illustrating the principle that human behavior, no matter how trivial it may appear, interacts dynamically with social perception, expectation, and narrative construction, ultimately producing outcomes that are more complex than any single participant could anticipate. Ja'far also reflects on the importance of discretion, timing, and audience in communication. What is said, how it is said, to whom, and when all matter tremendously in shaping perception, influencing behavior, and preventing or provoking misunderstanding. The slave's actions demonstrate that observation alone is insufficient. Interpretation, judgment, and awareness of social context are equally critical. And that failure to consider these elements can transform simple facts into misleading signals, ordinary events into crises, and innocent actors into inadvertent contributors to chaos. Finally, Ja'far synthesizes the role of the slave into the broader narrative. A minor participant whose knowledge, action, and lack of tact influenced both the progression of events and the perceptions of those around him, demonstrating the interconnectedness of human behavior, rumor, and consequence. He notes that even when individuals act without malice, without intent to deceive, and without understanding of the broader narrative, their presence, actions, and commentary can shape perception, escalate misunderstanding, and become essential components of the story, showing that in human affairs, significance is not determined solely by status, intention, or power, but by interaction, timing, and the subtleties of bagel with denant, gay denda with dali payu to the propiu to you to do to you to you to you to you to you to we ta ta we se up do our the fates to the fate of views of Ja'far allows himself a quiet reflection, acknowledging that the situation surrounding the chest, the three apples, the husband, the victim, and the slave is a complex tapestry of human behavior, perception, and consequence, and that the resolution will require not only insight into events, but also understanding, patience, and skill in managing social interpretation, rumor, and expectation. The rain continues to patter softly against the palace windows, a gentle reminder that the world proceeds regardless of human drama, and that even minor actors, unnoticed observers, and accidental participants can leave traces of influence that ripple outward, shaping outcomes in subtle, profound, and unpredictable ways. Ja'far, having listened to confessions, observed rumors, and pieced together human behavior, finally turns his attention to the heart of the mystery, identifying the real culprit, the individual whose actions set the chain of confusion, misunderstanding, and near tragedy into motion. The city outside is calm, the rain, a soft rhythm against the palace windows. Yet, within the palace walls, the tension is palpable. For everyone knows that the resolution of this puzzle will determine not only justice, of wisdom, authority, and discernment in the caliph's court, and Ja'far is acutely aware that a mistake now would have consequences far beyond facts. He begins by reviewing the accounts, the husband's confession, the neighbor's speculation, the slave's observations, and the unintended chaos they all created, realizing that while many were involved in amplifying the misunderstanding, only one acted with a direct hand in taking the apple that ultimately caused confusion, and that identifying this individual requires patience, insight, and careful scrutiny. Ja'far considers every subtlety, who had access, who had opportunity, who acted with a mix of curiosity, and whose intentions while perhaps not malicious, nonetheless resulted in a critical pivot in the story's outcome. It is then that he identifies a figure who had previously escaped notice. A minor servant. Not the husband, not the slave, not the neighbor, whose quiet presence and unassuming behavior masked a mischievous, opportunistic streak, and whose interaction with the chest and the apples had gone unremarked until this moment. Ja'far notes that human perception often overlooks the inconspicuous, and that in mysteries, the least obvious actors are frequently the most significant, their role hidden behind the chaos created by louder, more conspicuous participants, illustrating a timeless principle of observation and deduction. The vizier recalls how the servant, initially present to assist with mundane tasks, had noticed the rarity of the apple and, perhaps driven by curiosity or desire, taken it surreptitiously. Unaware of the broader consequences his action would generate, Ja'far reflects that intention alone does not define culpability in the eyes of justice. Yet the ripple effect of small acts here, the theft of a single fruit can, extend far beyond the original scope, impacting multiple individuals and setting in motion misunderstandings, fear, and rumor, a lesson that underscores the delicate interplay, consequence, and perception. Ja'far reconstructs the sequence of events meticulously. The apple is taken. The chest continues its journey down the Tigris. The severed hand is discovered, and the misinterpretations, fueled by rumor, gossip, and assumptions, converge to produce alarm, suspicion, and eventual tragedy. He notes that while the servant's action was simple, its consequences were magnified exponentially by human psychology, illustrating how minor acts can serve as catalysts for confusion, fear, and social upheaval, and how justice requires consideration and outcome, intention and perception, circumstance and consequence. The vizier also considers the servant's mindset, recognizing that minor mischief, curiosity, or opportunity often leads to actions that, while seemingly inconsequential in isolation, interact with existing tensions to produce outcomes that are unexpected and far-reaching. The apple's disappearance was not initially alarming, yet as rumor spread, suspicion grew, and the narrative became intertwined with the husband's intentions, the neighbor's observations, and the slave's commentary, culminating in a situation where the ordinary act of taking fruit transformed into a matter of intrigue, misunderstanding, and near calamity, a transformation entirely into human in origin. Ja'far addresses the caliph, presenting the evidence with precision, demonstrating how observation, deduction, and careful scrutiny reveal the servant as the origin point of the confusion. The pivot upon which the entire narrative turns. He notes that the identification of the real culprit is not only a matter of factual correctness, but also a lesson in careful attention to detail and the necessity of understanding both action and context, emphasizing that solving mysteries requires more than knowledge of events, insight into human behavior, motive, and perception. The Caliph listens intently, noting the irony and subtle humor in the revelation. A minor servant, acting with curiosity or opportunism, has caused ripples that nearly led to tragedy, while others, larger, more visible, and seemingly central to the events, have only amplified misunderstanding. Ja'far explains that this outcome illustrates the capriciousness of human affairs, the disproportionate consequences of small actions, and the hidden complexity of what might otherwise appear simple, reminding the court that truth, though often concealed, reveals itself to those who observe patiently and think carefully. He recounts the servant's behavior after taking the apple, attempts to hide the fruit, subtle actions to avoid detection, and small choices that inadvertently drew attention, each detail contributing to the eventual unraveling of the mystery, emphasizing that human behavior is rarely linear and that understanding it requires careful analysis of both overt acts and subtle nuances, as even minor decisions can carry consequences far beyond immediate awareness, influencing perception, rumor, and the interpretation of subsequent events. Ja'far notes that the revelation of the real culprit does not erase the misunderstanding, nor does it negate the role of others in amplifying the situation. Instead, it clarifies the origin while highlighting the web of human error, assumption, and speculation that followed. He explains to the court that while one individual may have acted first, the cumulative effect of many actors, husband, neighbor, slave, and others, transformed a simple act into a complex narrative, demonstrating that human interaction, rumor, and perception are as critical to outcomes as intention and action, and that understanding this interplay is central to administering fair and informed judgment. The vizier emphasizes that the servant's action, while mischievous, was not motivated by malice, and that justice must consider context, intention, and consequence, not only the observable act. The identification of the real culprit, therefore, is both a resolution to the mystery and a demonstration of wisdom, patience, and careful scrutiny, reminding the Caliph, the court, and all present that human error, perception, and misunderstanding are intertwined with every event, and that even the smallest actors can shape outcomes in profound and unexpected ways. He reflects quietly on the lesson. The real culprit, though minor and often overlooked, catalyzed events that exposed human frailty, curiosity, and susceptibility to assumption, illustrating how ordinary individuals, acting within their own limited understanding and desire, can become pivotal in stories that expand far beyond their immediate control. Ja'far understands that resolving such mysteries, and more about clarifying fact, managing perception and ensuring that justice, understanding, and social equilibrium are restored. A delicate task that requires careful attention to both human behavior and the ripple effects of vexed pseudo. Endio as, but I earn you or I you I you I you t acti mother you are you say that you have that Finally, Ja'far observes that the revelation of the real culprit brings closure, a necessary anchor in the midst of the chaos, allowing the court, the husband, the neighbors, and the caliph himself to reconcile confusion with understanding. The servant's identification does not erase the lessons, the misunderstandings, or the consequences, but it clarifies origin, demonstrating that careful observation, patient reasoning, and attention to human behavior are essential to unraveling even the most tangled of mysteries, and that in Baghdad, as anywhere, the smallest actors can have the smallest actors and ordinary objects, combined with curiosity and purpose, can combined, prakiyu, pami setchi si aspi it you kasos what if you Ja'far now focuses on the delicate moment when a life hangs in the balance and the actions he takes or delays create what will later be remembered as a last-minute reprieve. A narrow window in which understanding, patience, and intervention avert tragedy. The palace is quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the windows, a rhythmic backdrop to the tension that pervades the room. And Ja'far reflects that, in Baghdad, the difference between death and mercy and the ability to manage perception, circumstance, and human emotion with subtlety and care, a skill he has honed over years of courtly observation. The reprieve begins with careful observation. The accused, awaiting judgment, is unaware of the nuances that will save them, and Ja'far, aware of both the caliph's temperament and the broader context, must navigate conversation, presentation, and explanation to ensure clarity without arousing suspicion or impatience. He notes that this moment, while tense, is also instructive, demonstrating the power of timing and communication in human affairs, and showing how one's understanding of motive, circumstance, and perception can transform an imminent punishment into a moment of relief, learning, and subtle amusement, particularly when the absurdity of the situation is fully appreciated. Ja'far begins by clarifying the sequence of events for the Caliph, emphasizing the role of misunderstanding, rumor, and the minor but consequential actions of the servant and other participants, illustrating how the original act, the taking of a single apple spiraled into a chain of suspicion, misinterpretation, and near tragedy. The Caliph listens carefully, his expressions shifting as the narrative unfolds, and Ja'far notes how human attention, once focused on narrative clarity and evidence, can pivot rapidly from indignation to understanding, demonstrating the malleability of perception and the necessity of measured explanation in moments of judgment. He highlights the role of the husband, who, though initially suspected, acted with intention rooted in love, care, and kindness rather than malice, showing that understanding the difference between appearance and reality is central to justice. The Vizier emphasizes that human error, emotion, and circumstance often intersect in ways that amplify consequence, and that judgment must account not only for observable action, but also for motive, context, and outcome, ensuring that mercy and fairness are appliers permits a subtle balance that requires careful orchestration, patience, and insight into human behavior. The accused, awaiting punishment, becomes increasingly anxious, unaware that the resolution is contingent not on the Caliph's caprice, but on Ja'far's methodical explanation of cause, effect, and intention, illustrating the intricate relationship between authority, understanding, and perception. Ja'far navigates this delicate balance with patience, presenting facts, clarifying intent, and emphasizing the layers of misunderstanding that led to the current predicament, showing how thoughtful intervention can avert unnecessary tragedy, reinforce justice, and provide insight into human frailty, perception, and social dynamics, all while maintaining the calm dignity of the court. He recounts the precise moment when understanding dawns. The Caliph, informed by Ja'far's patient explanation, recognizes the minor role of the accused in the broader sequence of events, perceiving the chain of misinterpretation, rumor, and minor acts that led to suspicion. In this moment, the accused's fate shifts from near-certain punishment to reprieve, a reminder that justice is as much about timing, explanation, and perception as it is about fact, evidence, and consequence, and that human lives, intertwined with misunderstanding and curiosity, and the careful management of narrative and interpretation. Ja'far also reflects on the broader social lesson that human beings are prone to misinterpretation, assumption, and rumor, and that intervention, clarification, and patience can prevent injustice, minimize consequence, and restore order to situations that might otherwise spiral into unnecessary chaos. The reprieve is not only practical but symbolic, demonstrating the efficacy of careful observation, reasoning, and narrative control in navigating complex human affairs, where minor acts, ordinary objects, and inadvertent actions can produce disproportionately large consequences if left unchecked. He emphasizes that the reprieve is a product of both understanding and timing, Delivered too early, it might have been ignored or doubted. Delivered too late, it could not have prevented misfortune. The delicate orchestration of explanation, audience perception, and narrative sequencing is essential, demonstrating that human affairs are as much about interpretation, communication, and management of perception as they are about action, motive, and consequence, and that skillful intervention can transform imminent disaster into clarity, relief, and, in its own way, subtle amusement. The Vizier notes the human element, the anxiety, relief, and subtle social recalibration that occur once the reprieve is understood, showing how perception shapes response, and how careful guidance can restore both individual security and social harmony. Ja'far considers that while the reprieve resolves immediate danger, it also imparts a lesson in the unpredictability of human behavior and the importance of measured response in the face of rumor, misunderstanding, and minor but pivotal actions. A lesson that resonates far beyond the palace walls and into the rhythms of daily life in Baghdad. He reflects on the absurdity and subtle humor inherent in the reprieve, that the fate of a human life depended on a single apple, a chest, a severed hand, and the interpretations of minor actors. Yet careful observation and explanation can restore order, clarify misunderstanding, and avert consequence. Ja'far allows a quiet acknowledgement that human affairs, even when tragic or potentially catastrophic, often contain a gentle absurdity, demonstrating both the complexity and the unpredictability of social interaction, human perception, and the delicate balance between action, intention, and interpretation. Finally, Ja'far observes that the reprieve is not merely an act of mercy, but a demonstration of insight, timing, and the power of understanding human behavior, perception, and the interplay of circumstance, action, and rumor. It is a quiet victory for patience, observation, and reason, a reminder that human affairs, while often chaotic and unpredictable, can be guided toward resolution through careful attention and the judicious application of insight, ensuring and social equilibrium are restored, and that ordinary objects, minor participants, and inadvertent actions are seen in their true context rather than through the distorting lens of assumption and rumor. Ja'far now addresses the formal conclusion of events, the moment when justice is applied, or at least a version of it that satisfies the court and the caliph, though he knows that in practice, justice is often more about perception than absolute fairness. A subtle blend of consequence, explanation, and social reassurance. The palace is quiet. The rain outside, a gentle, persistent murmur, and Ja'far reflects on how human expectation closure, and accountability, even in circumstances where nuance, misinterpretation, and accident have created outcomes that defy simple judgment, reminding him that the application is amazing by mind. You are a now review pre-mind with a recent pre-me-you He recounts how the Caliph, informed by Ja'far's careful explanation, assigns punishment and recompense in a manner that balances fact, intention, and social expectation. Though the measures taken are modest and, in some cases, largely symbolic, highlighting the tension between formal authority and practical human understanding, Ja'far observes the reactions of those involved: the accused, the husband, the minor servant, and even the neighbors, and notes that, while the measures might appear light or perfunctory, they serve to reinforce social norms, restore perceived order, and demonstrate that consequence, however tempered, follows action, providing both reassurance and a lesson in prudence. The real culprit, the minor servant, receives a reprimand and a small corrective task rather than severe punishment, reflecting both the absence of malicious intent and the mitigating effects of context, circumstance, and human error, while others implicated indirectly through rumor, assumption, or minor involvement experience admonishment or gentle correction rather than formal penalty. Ja'far reflects that this distribution of consequence, that justice is rarely absolute, often tempered by insight, compassion, and social awareness, and that the goal is as much to restore harmony as to punish wrongdoing, especially when human frailty has amplified crises. He also notes the subtle humor in the outcome. The fuss over 3 apples, a floating chest, and a severed hand has culminated in consequences that, while meaningful, are far less severe than the tension, fear, and speculation they inspired, underscoring the disproportionate weight human perception can lend to ordinary events. Ja'far understands that in human affairs, the gap between perceived severity and actual consequence is often wide, and that careful management of expectation, explanation, and social interpretation is essential to ensuring that resolution is accepted, understood, even when it is tempered, symbolic, or slightly ironic. The Vizier observes how the measures taken are sufficient to reinforce social hierarchy and responsibility, reminding participants that while human error, misunderstanding, and rumor are inevitable, accountability remains a key principle, though applied with discretion and tempered judgment. He notes that justice in this context is not about rigid application of law, but about aligning perception with reality, demonstrating cause and subtly guiding human behavior, ensuring that the lessons of misunderstanding, assumption, and consequence are both observed and internalized, even as the immediate fear or tension dissipates. Ja'far reflects on the reactions of the husband and neighbors, each of whom navigates relief, embarrassment, and subtle satisfaction at the outcome, recognizing that social perception, personal reputation, and relational harmony are as integral to justice as formal measures of punishment. The chest, the apples, and the minor servant have become symbols within this social negotiation, markers of human error, curiosity, and misperception, and their consequences resonate as teaching points about observation, assumption, and the importance of careful reasoning in both personal and communal affairs. He also notes that the outcome reinforces the principle of proportionality. Minor actors and minor actions are met with measured consequence, while major misunderstandings are clarified rather than punished, highlighting the distinction between intent and impact, between perception and reality, and between the mechanics of social correction and the moral dimensions of human behavior. Ja'far sees this as a subtle but important lesson for the caliph, the court, and all who observe. Justice is not merely punitive. It is corrective, instructive, and designed to maintain harmony, order, and social equilibrium in a world shaped by human imperfection. The vizier considers the broader implications. The city of Baghdad, its residents, and the palace staff all witness the resolution, observing that while confusion, rumor, and minor misbehavior can escalate, careful explanation, measured consequence, and patient oversight can restore balance, reaffirm social norms, and prevent the minor from becoming catastrophic. Ja'far reflects that in human affairs, justice is inseparable from perception, narrative, and social expectation, and that administering consequence requires attention to both objective fact and the human context in which events unfold, a balance between authority, insight, and empathy that is as delicate as it is essential. He recounts the subtle interplay of relief and reflection among those present. The accused breathes more easily. The minor servant learns caution. The husband and neighbors adjust their perceptions, and the caliph gains reassurance that both order and understanding have been restored. Ja'far notes that in social terms, this restoration is as significant as any formal measure of justice, because human behavior, perception, and trust must be recalibrated following disruption, misunderstanding, and near tragedy, ensuring that the community can continue functioning with clarity, awareness, and appropriate caution. Finally, Ja'far reflects quietly on the paradox of justice. In this case, it is served, but in a manner tempered by circumstance, guided by understanding, and informed by human frailty. The consequences are real but measured, the lessons instructive but gently applied, and the social order reaffirmed without excessive severity, demonstrating that justice when administered thoughtfully, can reconcile accountability, insight, and compassion, ensuring that both individuals and the broader community emerge with clarity, understanding, and the subtle, lingering amusement of having witnessed the curious unfolding of a story that began with 3 apples and a floating chest. Ja'far now pauses to reflect on the broader implications of the entire affair. The lessons woven into the curious story of the 3 apples, the floating chest, and the near tragedy that gripped the city and the palace alike. The rain outside continues its gentle rhythm, a soft and persistent reminder of time's passage, and Ja'far muses that human behavior, perception, and assumption often teach more through consequence than through instruction, demonstrating that the simplest objects can reveal profound truths about jealousy, suspicion, and the unforeseen consequences of minor actions in a complex social web. He notes the first lesson: suspicion, even when based on minimal evidence, can escalate rapidly, creating tension, conflict, and near catastrophe. The husband's intentions were pure, yet rumor, misperception, and incomplete information transformed his actions into the appearance of wrongdoing, showing that human beings often interpret events through the lens of assumption, and that careful observation, empathy, and patience are essential to distinguish fact from perception, ensuring that misunderstanding does not spiral into unnecessary harm or unjust consequence. The second lesson arises from jealousy, and even those with the best intentions can misinterpret actions through the filter of envy or perceived slight, illustrating that human emotions, though natural, can distort perception and amplify ordinary events into crises. Ja'far reflects that this dynamic is as relevant in the Caliph's palace as it is in the streets of Baghdad, and that awareness of how emotion colors interpretation, preventing escalation and fostering understanding, reminding all that perception, while compelling, is not always accurate. A third lesson concerns the role of rumor and communication. Information, once shared, becomes subject to reinterpretation, embellishment, and misapplication, often diverging dramatically from original intent. Ja'far observes how the minor servant's observations, the neighbor's speculations, and the husband's actions were all distorted, demonstrating that social networks, however informal, amplify error as easily as they transmit truth, emphasizing the importance of discretion, clarity, and verification intentions or judgments, particularly in situations charged with emotion or consequence. He also considers the unexpected consequences of minor actions. A single apple, seemingly trivial, became the pivot around which suspicion, rumor, and near tragedy revolved, illustrating that ordinary objects, when entwined with human curiosity, assumption, and social perception, can catalyze events far beyond their inherent significance. Ja'far notes that this principle, evident in the story of the three apples, is a timeless observation about human affairs. Minor participants, and ordinary circumstances can combine unpredictably to produce dramatic outcomes, and how understanding this interplay is essential legal and moral landscapes. The Vizier emphasizes the importance of context in interpreting behavior. Actions cannot be judged solely by their surface appearance, but must be understood in relation to intent, knowledge, and circumstance. The husband acted from love, the minor servant from curiosity, and the neighbors from observation. Yet perception and assumption magnified these acts into something seemingly sinister. Ja'far observes that wisdom arises from considering multiple perspectives, analyzing motives, and understanding the social and emotional context as it is to daily human interaction, reinforcing that careful reasoning mitigates error and prevents injustice. Another lesson lies in the consequences of haste. Acting on incomplete information, jumping to conclusions, or imposing judgment prematurely can exacerbate misunderstanding, elevate conflict, and produce outcomes more severe than necessary. Ja'far reflects that the Caliph's decision to rely on his vizier's patience and careful reconstruction of events demonstrates the value of measured thought, the avoidance of rash action, and the critical importance of timing, justice, showing that restraint and observance as authority in resolving complex human affairs. He also notes a subtle but significant lesson about human perception. People often see what they expect to see rather than what is actually present, and the assumptions we bring to a situation shape our interpretation of events. The floating chest, the severed hand, and the three apples became symbols onto which suspicion and imagination were projected, illustrating that awareness of bias, expectation, and cognitive distortion is essential in understanding events clearly. When human emotion, curiosity, and rumor are active forces influencing behavior and interpretation. Ja'far reflects on the social dynamics of responsibility. Accountability is not only about individual action, but also about the interplay between multiple participants, each contributing to perception, rumor, and consequence. The story demonstrates that human systems of justice, social expectation, and moral evaluation must account for context, interaction, and human fallibility, recognizing that actions rarely occur in isolation, and that understanding the chain of influence is essential to equitable resolution, accurate interpretation, and the maintenance of social equilibrium in any community. He further considers the value of storytelling itself, recounting the events, clarifying misunderstanding, and examining the actions and motives of participants provides an opportunity for reflection, learning, and adjustment, ensuring that lessons about suspicion, jealousy, and human error are internalized and inform future behavior. Ja'far notes that history, observation, and careful narration serve not merely to entertain, but to instruct, allowing participants and observers alike to understand the consequences and minor actions and to cultivate patience, discretion, and empathy in the face of uncertainty or conflict. The Vizier also points out that humor and irony are integral to human learning, recognizing the absurdity inherent in a series of misunderstandings surrounding 3 apples. A floating chest and minor participants helps temper fear, anxiety, and tension, allowing reflection and instruction to occur with levity, illustrating that even in situations of near tragedy, perception, patience, and subtle amusement can coexist, providing insight, moral guidance, and social cohesion, all while highlighting the unpredictability of human behavior. Ja'far concludes that the story's lessons extend beyond the palace and the city. Ordinary objects, small acts, minor participants, and inadvertent actions can create ripple effects that influence perception, judgment, and consequence in ways far exceeding their apparent significance. The story demonstrates that awareness of motive, context, and social dynamics is essential, and that observation, patience, and careful reasoning are key to mitigating misunderstanding, maintaining justice, and fostering harmonious human interaction, ensuring that minor errors or curiosity do not escalate into disproportionate consequence. Finally, Ja'far allows a moment of quiet reflection, considering how the 3 apples, the floating chest, the minor servant, the husband, and the neighbors each played a role in teaching timeless lessons about suspicion, assumption, perception, and the unforeseen effects of ordinary actions. The rain continues softly, a gentle reminder of time's steady passage. And Ja'far muses that while human behavior remains unpredictable, the careful study, unpovent, provides guidance, understanding, and subtle amusement, ensuring that the story of the 3 apples endures not only as a curious tale, but also as a repository of wisdom, instruction, and reflection for those Benchinculi. Ja'far finally observes the city and palace settling back into their usual rhythm, the tension gradually dissolving, the lessons of the 3 apples absorbed, and life resuming its ordinary cadence. Though with the subtle imprint of curiosity, reflection, and a gentle awareness of human folly. The rain continues its soft, rhythmic patter against the palace windows, mingling with the distant sounds of the Tigris flowing, the faint clatter of market activity, and the quiet hum of the city at rest, reminding drama can flare brightly and briefly. Broader world persists in a steady, predictable rhythm, offering calm, continuity, and perspective. The citizens, neighbors, and palace staff carry on with their daily routines. Their actions, now informed by the recent events, a quiet reflection lingering in their consciousness about the role of perception, rumor, and small actions in shaping consequence. Kefa notes that while life appears ordinary, the collective experience of misunderstanding, near tragedy, and resolution has subtly shifted awareness, attention to detail, and recognition of the power of small acts can leave lasting lessons, quietly influencing behavior, social interaction, social and judgment in ways colical and ways with ways akis cast like you the you are you are be need you to you the husband returns to his household, relieved that suspicion and misunderstanding had been clarified, and yet carrying a quiet reminder of how easily good intentions can be misinterpreted, illustrating that human relationships are delicate, perception is powerful, and trust, though resilient, requires attention and care. Ja'far reflects on the importance of maintaining perspective, patience, and empathy in social life. One observed, guided, and understood can navigate misunderstandings, learn from minor errors, and restore harmony without the need for drastic intervention, a subtle triumph of reason and human insight over an insight and assumption. The minor servant, chastened but unharmed, resumes his duties with greater awareness, carrying with him both relief and instruction. A reminder that actions, no matter how minor, can produce unforeseen effects, and that understanding context, consequence, and human perception is essential to personal growth and social harmony. Error and learning provides a curiosity, error and learning lesson demonstrating human behavior can be corrected. Social order restored, and insight gained, reinforcing the idea that consequence and underwend in the wall in quite unclaw crying and we to you make the sound being we neighbors, witnesses, and minor participants continue their routines, their gossip and observation now tempered by a subtle awareness of how rumor, assumption, and minor acts can escalate into disproportionate concern. Ja'far reflects that social perception is resilient yet malleable, and that experiences such as the floating chest, the 3 apples, and the near tragedy serve as quiet reminders of the importance of careful judgment, empathy, and restraint, ensuring that human communities continue to function, learn, and adapt even after moments of heightened drama, tension, or confusion. He also considers the city itself, the Tigris flowing calmly past, the markets bustling with ordinary trade, the call of merchants and the laughter of children weaving a background of continuity and normalcy. Ja'far observes that while human drama flares and subsides, the broader rhythms of life remain steady, providing perspective, reassurance, and a sense of continuity that allows individuals to recover, reflect, and continue with both caution and understanding, illustrating that the ordinary backdrop of existence often carries its own quiet lessons in patience, observation, and resilience. The Caliph resumes his duties, mindful of the resolution, reassured by Ja'far's insight, and yet subtly aware that even minor events can illuminate profound truths about human behavior, social perception, and the delicate balance of justice, empathy, and authority. Far, note that the palace, while outwardly unchanged, carries the subtle imprint of lessons learned. Careful observation, measured response, and understanding of human foibles now inform the importance of insight, communication, and patience in governance, social management, and personal conduct. He reflects on the quiet humor of the episode, the dramatic fuss over a simple fruit, the floating chest, the severed hand, and the minor servant's curiosity, illustrating that life often presents absurdity alongside consequence, and that humor, reflection, and insight can coexist in human affairs, offering both amusement and instruction. Ja'far muses that even in ordinary moments, the interplay of human curiosity, error, and perception produces stories worth observing, studying, providing a subtle rhythm of learning that complements the ordinary flow of daily life and enriches both personal and communal understanding. The Vizier also notes the importance of reconciliation and restoration. Relationships mended, misunderstandings clarified, social order reaffirmed, and lessons absorbed. Ja'far reflects that such quiet conclusions are as vital as dramatic interventions, showing that the restoration of calm, understanding, and perspective ensures that individuals, households, and communities move forward with greater awareness, subtle amusement, and reinforced insight, cultivating resilience, empathy, and the capacity to navigate future challenges with patience and perception. Finally, Ja'far allows himself a moment of calm observation, noting the soft patter of rain, the gentle flow of the river, and the quiet return of the city to ordinary activity, understanding that the tale of the three apples, though resolved, will leave a lingering imprint, a collection of lessons about suspicion, assumption, minor acts, human perception, and the unforeseen consequences that ripple outward from seemingly trivial beginnings. The episode concludes not with dramatic fanfare, but with a quiet return to normal. A gentle reminder that life, even in moments of chaos and misunderstanding, continues its measured rhythm. Observation and understanding for those who are attentive, reflective, and willing to learn from the subtle patterns with surrender, behavior, you were may congruer, and were may you are re you are you are re you are you are you we you are you to way you to I